February 23, 1944. Eniwetok Atoll, Marshall Islands. Through the cracked lens of his binoculars, Japanese Navy Captain Yoshima Toshio watched something that contradicted every principle of military engineering he had learned at the Imperial Naval Academy. Across the lagoon on an island the Americans had captured just 4 days earlier, he could see bulldozers moving earth in patterns that suggested not temporary fortifications, but permanent construction. The island had been jungle and coral rock on February 19th when the Marines landed. Now, on the morning of February 23rd, he counted over 30 pieces of heavy construction equipment operating simultaneously. The Americans were building something massive, and they were doing it with a speed that seemed physically impossible. Captain Toshio commanded the remaining Japanese forces on Parry Island, the last unconquered piece of Eniwetok Atoll. His orders were to hold for as long as possible, to delay the American advance toward the home islands. Japanese defensive doctrine assumed that even after the Americans captured an island, it would take months to transform it into an operational base. Time to build roads through jungle, time to blast coral for foundations, time to construct facilities and airstrips. That time, Japanese planners believed, would allow them to reinforce other positions, to prepare deeper defensive lines. But what Toshio observed through his binoculars that morning suggested the Americans possessed capabilities that rendered Japanese calculations obsolete. The men operating those bulldozers and graders wore not army fatigues, but Navy dungarees and steel helmets marked with distinctive insignia. They were members of the United States Naval Construction Battalions, units whose initials Seabee had given them the nickname Seabees, and they were about to revolutionize warfare in the Pacific through the simple expedient of building things faster than the enemy believed possible. The creation of the Seabees emerged from the hard lessons of December 1941 and the months that followed. When Japanese forces swept across the Pacific, they captured not just territory, but the infrastructure that made military operations possible. Airfields, harbors, supply depots, roads, all the unglamorous but essential foundations of modern warfare fell into enemy hands. American forces found themselves fighting without the logistical base that modern military operations required. At Wake Island, civilian construction workers employed by Morrison Knudsen Company had fought alongside Marines when the Japanese attacked. Some handled weapons with skill that surprised military observers. These construction men understood heavy equipment, explosives, and engineering in ways that proved valuable in combat. But as civilians, they lacked military status. If captured, the Geneva Convention offered them no protection. Several captured at Wake were executed as unlawful combatants. Admiral Ben Moriel, chief of the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks, recognized both the problem and the opportunity. The Navy needed construction workers who could build under combat conditions, men who understood engineering but could defend themselves, civilians in skill but military in status. On December 28, 1941, just 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Moriel presented his proposal to the Navy's senior leadership. He advocated for military construction battalions, units that would combine the technical expertise of civilian contractors with the discipline and protection of military status. The proposal faced skepticism. Construction work had always been contracted to civilian firms. The military built permanent bases, not temporary facilities under fire. But the Pacific War would be fought across thousands of islands, most lacking any infrastructure. Speed of construction would be as important as speed of advance. On January 5, 1942, the Navy authorized formation of the Naval Construction Battalions. The name itself came from the abbreviation Seabee, which sailors quickly transformed into Seabees. The first recruits came from the civilian construction industry, men who knew how to operate bulldozers and cranes, who understood concrete and steel, who could read engineering plans and improvise solutions. The Navy's recruiting standards were unique. While most military branches wanted young men in peak physical condition, the Seabees recruited skilled tradesmen regardless of age. Men in their 30s, 40s, even 50s, enlisted if they possessed valuable skills. Carpenters, electricians, plumbers, heavy equipment operators, concrete workers, steel workers, all found themselves wearing Navy dungarees. The average age of a Seabee was 37, ancient by military standards. Some units included men over 60 who possessed specialized knowledge that decades of experience had taught them. The training program at Camp Allen, Virginia, and later at Camp Peary reflected the dual nature of Seabee work. Recruits learned military discipline, weapons handling, and combat tactics. But they also learned advanced construction techniques, particularly methods for rapid building under austere conditions. Instructors emphasized speed and functionality over permanence. A Seabee airstrip didn't need to last 20 years, it needed to be operational in 20 days. This distinction would prove revolutionary. The first Seabee units deployed to the Pacific in March 1942. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion arrived at Pearl Harbor to begin repair work on facilities damaged during the Japanese attack. What they accomplished stunned Navy observers. Working around the clock, the 6th Battalion completed in 3 weeks what civilian contractors had estimated would take 3 months. They didn't follow standard construction procedures. They improvised, adapted, and achieved results through methods that violated every peacetime regulation but worked brilliantly under wartime necessity. By May 1942, Seabee battalions were operating across the Pacific. Each battalion consisted of approximately 1,000 men organized into 4 companies. They brought equipment that civilian contractors considered essential, but that military logistics officers considered excessive. Bulldozers, graders, scrapers, cranes, cement mixers, pile drivers, electrical generators, welding equipment, machine shops, surveying instruments. The standard equipment list for a single battalion filled 12 pages of fine print. The Japanese first encountered Seabee capabilities at Guadalcanal. When the 1st Marine Division captured the partially completed Japanese airfield on August 7, 1942, the 1st Marine Division Engineer Battalion began work to complete it. But they lacked the heavy equipment and specialized skills needed for rapid construction. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion arrived on August 12 and transformed the situation. Working under Japanese artillery fire and aerial bombardment, Seabees completed the airstrip in just 8 days. They named it Henderson Field after a Marine aviator killed at Midway. Japanese observers watching from positions in the jungle couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. They had spent months building that airfield using Korean laborers. The Americans, working under fire, completed it in little over a week. Worse, they kept improving it. Every night, Japanese artillery shelled the runway. Every morning, Seabees repaired the damage before dawn, ensuring that American aircraft could operate continuously. Japanese intelligence reports describe the American construction units as possessing almost supernatural efficiency. The speed of Seabee construction derived from revolutionary techniques that civilian peacetime contractors had never developed because regulations and insurance requirements prevented them. Seabees ignored safety margins that peacetime engineers considered essential. They didn't conduct environmental studies or worry about long-term maintenance. They built what was needed, as fast as possible, using whatever materials were available. The coral runway became their signature achievement. Pacific Islands typically lacked suitable materials for airstrip construction. Bringing crushed rock from the United States was impossible given shipping constraints. Traditional concrete runways required massive amounts of cement, steel reinforcement, and time. Seabees developed a technique using coral. They crushed the coral rock found on most Pacific Islands, mixed it with seawater and a small amount of Portland cement, and created a surface that aircraft could use. The process was brilliantly simple. Bulldozers cleared the area, removing jungle and leveling the ground. Rock crushers, often improvised from captured Japanese equipment, pulverized coral into gravel. Graders spread the coral in layers, each compacted by heavy rollers. Water trucks sprayed seawater mixed with minimal cement over each layer. The sun baked this mixture into a surface hard enough to support bombers weighing 30 tons. A Seabee battalion could construct a 6,000-foot coral runway in 20 days working around the clock. This speed defied everything military engineers had previously achieved. Traditional concrete runway construction took months and required extensive logistic support. Seabees could begin work the day Marines secured the island and have aircraft operating within 3 weeks. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders cannot be overstated. Their strategy depended on time and distance. Even after losing an island, they calculated that months would pass before Americans could use it as a base. Those months would allow Japanese forces to reinforce other positions, to prepare defenses, to evacuate valuable equipment and personnel. Seabee construction speed eliminated this cushion. Islands fell and became operational bases so quickly that Japanese defensive planning couldn't keep pace. At Bougainville in November 1943, the Japanese learned this lesson with devastating clarity. The 3rd Marine Division captured a beachhead at Empress Augusta Bay on November 1st. Within hours, the 25th and 53rd Naval Construction Battalions were ashore with their equipment. Working under constant Japanese counterattacks, these Seabee units constructed a bomber airstrip in just 16 days. On November 17th, Marine Corps bombers launched strikes from Bougainville against the major Japanese base at Rabaul, just 250 miles away. For Japanese commanders at Rabaul, the implications were terrifying. That swamp-covered beach where Marines had landed just 2 weeks earlier was now launching daily bombing raids against their supposedly secure fortress. The Americans had compressed months of construction into weeks, completely disrupting Japanese defensive timelines. The Battle of Tarawa in November 1943 provided the most dramatic demonstration of Seabee capabilities under fire. The 18th Naval Construction Battalion landed with the assault waves on November 20th, the first time construction troops had gone in with combat forces. Japanese defenders fighting from fortified positions inflicted horrific casualties. 14 Seabees died on the first day, 78 were wounded, but the survivors kept working. While Marines fought Japanese soldiers in brutal close combat, Seabees drove bulldozers through fire to clear paths off the beaches. They built roads across the reef using destroyed Japanese vehicles as fill material. They repaired the damaged pier that became the lifeline for American forces. 3 days after the landing, while mopping up operations continued, Seabees began surveying for an airstrip. 7 days after the landing, they were moving Earth. 18 days after the landing, on December 8th, American aircraft were operating from a completed airstrip on Tarawa. Japanese officers who survived Tarawa and were captured described their shock at American construction speed to interrogators. They had assumed Tarawa's isolation would protect other bases even after the atoll fell. Instead, within 3 weeks, it became a launching point for strikes against other Japanese positions. The Seabee reputation for working under fire became legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet. At Cape Gloucester, on New Britain, the 17th Naval Construction Battalion worked for weeks under constant Japanese artillery fire. They lost 23 men killed and over 100 wounded, casualty rates that would have broken most combat units. But they completed a bomber strip in 26 days that allowed attacks on Japanese positions that had been considered out of range. Admiral William Halsey, commanding the South Pacific Theater, summarized Seabee contributions in a February 1944 message. "The Seabees are worth their weight in gold to the Navy. They land with assault troops, build under fire, work around the clock, and create bases from nothing in time frames that seem impossible. Without their capabilities, our advance would be measured in years rather than months." The techniques Seabees developed became standard across the Pacific. Reconnaissance teams went ashore with Marine assault forces, surveying potential airstrip locations while combat continued. Battalion commanders made construction decisions based on aerial photographs taken during naval bombardment, beginning design work before the island was secured. Equipment lists were preloaded aboard landing ship tanks in the order it would be needed. Bulldozers and graders first, followed by rock crushers, cement mixers, and specialized tools. The infamous Marston mat, officially called pierced steel planking, revolutionized forward airfield construction. Each interlocking steel plank measured 10 feet long and 15 inches wide, with holes to reduce weight and allow water drainage. Seabees could lay mast and mat over a prepared coral base in days, creating an all-weather surface that conventional construction would have taken months to achieve. The logistics of supporting Seabee operations strained Navy supply systems, but proved essential to Pacific success. Each battalion required approximately 1,500 tons of equipment and supplies monthly. Bulk cement came in 50-pound bags that had to be kept dry in tropical humidity. Spare parts for construction equipment filled entire cargo holds. Fuel for bulldozers and generators consumed shipping space desperately needed for military supplies. But the return on investment was undeniable. Every Seabee battalion could construct facilities that would otherwise require months of contracted work and millions of dollars in peacetime budgets. More importantly, they could do it immediately after combat operations, eliminating delays that Japanese strategy depended upon. At Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands during January and February 1944, Seabee Construction reached its pinnacle of coordination and speed. 5 naval construction battalions participated in the operation, each assigned specific tasks before the 1st Marine landed. The 95th Battalion would build the primary bomber strip. The 121st would construct the fighter strip. The 76th would develop harbour facilities. The 31st would build roads and storage areas. The 102nd would construct command facilities and housing. The planning was meticulous. Aerial reconnaissance photographs were analyzed for soil conditions, drainage patterns, and optimal runway alignment. Equipment manifests were prepared listing every bulldozer, crane, and cement mixer each battalion would need. Supply requisitions specified ammunition for Japanese equipment that would be captured and converted to American use. The assault began February 1, 1944. Marines captured the airfield island of Roy Namur within 2 days. The 95th Naval Construction Battalion came ashore on February 3rd, while sporadic fighting continued. Within hours, bulldozers were clearing Japanese debris. By February 5th, Seabees had surveyed the runway alignment, staked the boundaries, and begun moving earth. Japanese prisoners watched with undisguised amazement as American construction equipment operated day and night without pause. The standard Seabee work schedule called for 2 12-hour shifts, but at Kwajalein, many men worked 16 to 18 hours daily. The sense of competition between battalions drove them. Each unit wanted to complete their assignment first, to prove they were the best Seabee battalion in the Pacific. On February 15th, just 12 days after coming ashore, the first American aircraft landed on the completed bomber strip at Roy Namur. By February 20th, the field was fully operational, with over 100 aircraft based there. The construction had taken 19 days from landing to operational status. At Ngebe Island, another part of Kwajalein Atoll, the 121st Battalion achieved even more remarkable speed. They completed a fighter strip in just 11 days, establishing a record that would stand for the remainder of the war. Japanese officers observing from bypassed islands in the Marshalls sent reports to Tokyo describing construction operations that seemed to violate physical laws. How could the Americans move such quantities of earth so quickly? How did they transform raw jungle into operational air bases in less than 3 weeks? The reports were so extraordinary that Imperial General Headquarters initially dismissed them as exaggerations from demoralized commanders. Then reconnaissance aircraft brought back photographs, images of massive airfields where jungle had stood weeks earlier, of harbors carved from coral, of roads connecting facilities that couldn't possibly exist yet. The evidence was undeniable. Americans possessed construction capabilities that Japanese military planning had never accounted for. The human cost of Seabee operations remained steady throughout the war. These were construction workers, not combat troops, yet they suffered casualty rates approaching those of infantry units. 272 Seabees were killed in action, over 2,000 were wounded. Many more died from disease, accidents, and the brutal conditions of Pacific construction work. At Peleliu in September 1944, the 33rd Naval Construction Battalion suffered 30% casualties while building an airfield under Japanese artillery fire. They completed the strip anyway, working through sniper attacks and artillery barrages that would have stopped conventional construction operations. The Seabee motto, "Can Do," was adopted early and reflected their attitude toward impossible assignments. When told a project couldn't be completed in the time available, Seabees responded, "Can do," and found a way. This attitude permeated every level of the organization. Battalion commanders accepted assignments that peacetime contractors would have rejected as impossible. Company officers devised construction methods that violated every safety regulation but worked under combat conditions. Individual Seabees improvised solutions using whatever materials were available, creating tools and techniques that civilian engineers had never imagined. At Tinian in the Marianas during July and August 1944, Seabees achieved their most impressive construction feat of the war. The island would become the primary base for B-29 Superfortress bombers attacking Japan, requiring runways longer and stronger than anything previously built in the Pacific. The specifications were daunting: 4 parallel runways, each 8,500 feet long and 200 feet wide, surface strength sufficient to support aircraft weighing 140,000 pounds, supporting facilities for thousands of personnel, millions of gallons of fuel, and countless tons of bombs. 6 Naval Construction Battalions received the assignment. The 135th, 139th, 141st, and others brought over 5,000 Seabees to Tinian. They brought equipment that filled 6 Liberty ships. The construction timeline would have been considered aggressive for a peacetime project. Under combat conditions, it was insane. 60 days to complete the first runway, 90 days for all 4 to be operational. The Seabees made it happen. Working through tropical heat, monsoon rains, and occasional Japanese air raids, they moved over 10 million cubic yards of earth. They crushed and laid over 1 million tons of coral. They poured 150,000 cubic yards of concrete. They laid thousands of feet of fuel pipeline. They built storage facilities, housing, maintenance shops, and all the infrastructure a major bomber base required. On November 24, 1944, just 4 months after Marines had secured the island, 111 B-29 bombers took off from Tinian to attack Tokyo. This was the first major bombing raid against the Japanese home islands from bases in the Marianas. It would not have been possible without Seabee construction speed. Japanese military analysts studying American operations in the Marianas finally grasped the full implications of Seabee capabilities. The Americans weren't just winning through superior numbers or better equipment. They possessed a fundamental advantage in speed of operations. They could turn captured territory into operational bases faster than Japan could reinforce threatened positions. This temporal advantage was as decisive as any technological superiority. Iwo Jima in February and March 1945 became the ultimate test of Seabee determination and skill. The island's volcanic ash presented construction challenges unlike anything encountered previously. Heavy equipment sank into the loose material. Coral was unavailable for runway construction. Everything had to be done with imported materials or improvised solutions. The 31st, 62nd, and 73rd Naval Construction Battalions landed with assault forces on February 19, 1945. Japanese defenders fighting from elaborate cave systems inflicted terrible casualties. The Seabees lost 49 men killed and over 200 wounded during the battle. But they kept working. Under artillery fire and mortar barrage, they improved the existing Japanese airfields and began constructing new ones. The volcanic ash that made conventional construction impossible forced innovation. Seabees developed techniques using crushed volcanic rock mixed with asphalt emulsion, creating a surface that could support aircraft despite the unstable soil conditions. On March 4th, just 2 weeks after the landing, and while heavy fighting continued in the northern part of the island, a crippled B-29 returning from a raid on Japan made an emergency landing on Iwo Jima's airfield. The crew of 11 men owed their lives to Seabee Construction Speed. Over the following months, over 2,000 B-29 crewmen would make emergency landings on Iwo Jima, each one surviving because Seabees had built operational airfields in timeframes measured in weeks rather than months. Okinawa, the final major amphibious operation of the Pacific War, saw 10 naval construction battalions working simultaneously. They constructed 8 airfields, expanded 4 harbors, built hundreds of miles of roads, and created the massive logistics infrastructure needed to support the planned invasion of Japan. The scale of construction at Okinawa exceeded all previous Pacific operations combined. Over 15,000 Seabees worked around the clock for months, moving over 20 million cubic yards of earth, laying thousands of feet of runway and building facilities for hundreds of thousands of military personnel. Japanese defenders watching from their cave positions on Okinawa sent their final reports to Tokyo, describing American construction operations that transformed the southern part of the island into a vast military base while combat continued in the north. One captured Japanese officer told his interrogators, "We understood you had more equipment and supplies than we did, but we did not understand that you could build so fast. Every plan we made assumed you would need months to make captured territory useful. You needed only weeks. This speed defeated us as surely as your aircraft and ships." The statistical summary of Seabee accomplishments in the Pacific staggers comprehension. Over 300 airfields constructed or improved, over 5,000 miles of roads built, over 400 piers and causeways constructed, over 300 million cubic yards of earth moved. These numbers represented the transformation of the Pacific from a vast ocean with scattered islands into a highway of bases that allowed American forces to project power across thousands of miles. But beyond statistics lay the fundamental revolution in warfare that Seabees represented. They proved that construction speed could be as decisive as combat power. That engineering was a weapon as important as artillery, that the ability to rapidly create infrastructure could determine strategic outcomes. Japanese military doctrine, like that of most nations, treated construction as a support function, something that followed combat operations after an appropriate interval. Seabees demolished this distinction. They made construction simultaneous with combat, eliminating the delay between capture and exploitation that Japanese strategy depended upon. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces found extensive documentation of Japanese military analysis. Among these documents were reports on American construction capabilities that revealed how profoundly Seabee operations had impacted Japanese strategic thinking. A November 1944 analysis prepared for Imperial General Headquarters stated, "American construction units possess capabilities that fundamentally alter warfare timeline. They transform captured islands into operational bases with speed that makes defense in depth impossible. When we lose an island, we must assume American aircraft will be operating from it within 3 weeks. This reality makes every defensive position vulnerable to attack from bases that did not exist a month earlier." Another report from March 1945 concluded, "The American construction battalions represent a form of warfare we did not anticipate and cannot counter. Their ability to rapidly create infrastructure gives Americans strategic mobility that our forces cannot match. We can destroy an American base, but they will rebuild it faster than we can mount a second attack. This regenerative capacity may be their most decisive advantage." These assessments proved prophetic. The speed of American base construction in the Pacific allowed operations that would have been impossible with conventional construction timelines. Island hopping worked because Seabees could turn each captured island into a base supporting the next operation before Japanese forces could react. The bombing campaign against Japan succeeded because Seabees built the airfields in the Marianas in time frames that prevented Japanese reinforcement of home island defenses. The planned invasion of Japan would have been supported by the massive logistics infrastructure Seabees were constructing at Okinawa and throughout the Western Pacific. The atomic bombs rendered this invasion unnecessary, but the preparation demonstrated American capability to project power through rapid base construction. The Seabee legacy extended far beyond World War II. The techniques they developed became standard in military construction worldwide. The concept of military construction battalions trained to work under fire became integral to American military organization. The Naval Construction Force, as Seabees are officially designated, continues today with the same can-do attitude that characterized their World War II service. They serve in every conflict, building infrastructure under conditions that civilian contractors cannot or will not accept. In Iraq and Afghanistan, Seabee battalions constructed bases, roads, and facilities using methods pioneered in the Pacific. They work under fire, adapt to local conditions, and complete projects in time frames that seem impossible to those unfamiliar with Seabee capabilities. The corporate descendants of wartime Seabee contractors, companies like Bechtel, Morrison Knudsen, and Brown and Root, apply lessons learned in the Pacific to civilian construction projects worldwide. The emphasis on speed, the willingness to improvise, the focus on functionality over perfection, these principles that Seabees developed under fire now drive modern construction management, but perhaps the most important Seabee legacy is the demonstration that in warfare, as in all human endeavors, infrastructure matters as much as combat power. The ability to build, to create, to transform raw territory into functional bases proved as decisive as the ability to destroy. The Seabees, who built 6,000-foot airstrips in 20 days, achieved victories as significant as any battle. They didn't destroy enemy forces. They created the infrastructure that made enemy positions untenable. They didn't win through firepower, but through construction speed that Japanese strategy couldn't counter. The Japanese officers who watched through binoculars as Seabees transformed coral atolls into air bases learned a lesson that military historians continue to study. Modern warfare isn't just about combat. It's about logistics, infrastructure, and the ability to rapidly create the facilities that military operations require. In this dimension of warfare, the Americans with their Seabees possessed overwhelming superiority. The legacy endures in unexpected places. When disaster strikes and rapid construction is needed, the first question authorities ask is often, can we get Seabees? Whether responding to hurricanes, tsunamis, or earthquakes, Naval Construction Force units deploy with the same equipment and attitude that characterized their World War II service. They assess damage, devise solutions, and build what's needed in time frames civilian contractors consider impossible. The 6,000-foot airstrips built in 20 days represented more than impressive engineering. They represented a revolution in military operations, a transformation of warfare through construction speed that Japanese forces never anticipated and never countered. Every aircraft that landed on those strips, every bomb dropped from those bases, every life saved by emergency landings on airfields that shouldn't have existed yet, all testified to Seabee achievement. Captain Toshio, watching from Parry Island in February 1944, as Seabees built their airfield across the lagoon, understood something fundamental had changed. His orders to hold, to delay, to buy time for Japanese forces to prepare deeper defenses all became meaningless when Americans could transform jungle islands into bomber bases in less than 3 weeks. Time, the essential element of every defensive strategy, had become an American weapon through Seabee construction speed. The final irony was that Japan had pioneered rapid military construction in the Pacific. Their seizure of territory in 1941 and 1942 had been followed by impressive base construction that allowed them to project power across vast distances. Japanese construction units worked efficiently, building the airfields and facilities that made their defensive perimeter functional. But they worked at conventional speeds, taking months to complete what Seabees accomplished in weeks. When American construction capabilities exceeded Japanese expectations by an order of magnitude, the entire defensive strategy collapsed. Every calculation about how long Americans would need to make captured territory useful proved wrong. Every plan based on using time and distance to offset American material advantages failed because Seabees eliminated the time component. In the end, the Japanese couldn't believe Seabees built 6,000-foot airstrips in 20 days because their entire military doctrine, their strategic planning, their understanding of warfare assumed such speed was impossible. The Seabees proved them wrong, one coral runway at a time, building not just airstrips but the infrastructure of victory. Their achievement stands as testament to American innovation, determination, and the simple truth that in modern warfare, those who build fastest often win decisively. The bulldozers and graders, the rock crushers and cement mixers, the men in Navy dungarees who operated them under fire, these were the weapons that Japan never anticipated and never countered. The Seabees built the road to victory 6,000 feet at a time in 20 days or less, proving that in the vast Pacific theater, construction speed could be as decisive as any naval battle or amphibious assault.